The Spin-off Podcast Network. Contact Energy's good plans give you periods of free or discounted power. The more of your current energy usage you shift to these times, the more you could save. Learn more about these plans at contact.co.nz/goodplans. Conditions, fair use policy and eligibility criteria apply. Power refers to electricity.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
When the Facts Change is brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in partnership with Kiwibank, the bank for Kiwi looking to get ahead in business and in life. A bank that delivers expertise and banking know-how, smart advice for business owners wanting to invest, grow their business or diversify. A bank that adapts with technology through the lens of its people and customers. It is a bank with heart that is driven by its purpose. Kiwi making Kiwi better off. You've probably heard the song that goes, know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Luckily for you, I'm not going to sing The Gambler. Kenny Rogers did a much better job. But it really highlights this issue we have in our housing market at the moment. When do you sell? When your house price is much lower than where you think it should be. This is an unusual position for a lot of New Zealanders. We've now seen house prices fall anywhere between 5 and 20% from their peaks at the end of 2021. And that was 4 years ago. And we haven't seen that before. The previous drops in actual prices typically only lasted for a year or two and typically didn't go much more than 5 or 10%. And then there was a quick bounce back. That's what we saw in 2008 and 2009. And so everyone was back on the horse, 2011, 12, with high house prices. And it's always easier to be comfortable selling when you know you're making a profit, that you're getting at least what you think it's worth. But after 2021, that boom we saw in the wake of COVID, people ingested the values of their homes and don't want to sell for less than what they think it's worth. And actually, they don't have to. Mortgagee sales are at record lows. And for a lot of people, when they put their house on the market and they don't get what they want, they just take it off. But at some point, you have to decide, if the prices don't rebound above the peaks again, whether it's time to fold. This week on When the Facts Change, I spoke with Sarah Wood, the CEO of realestate.co.nz, who reports in April another rise in the number of listings and that there's plenty of supply on the market, and that many homeowners are being quite choosy about selling, that the market is quite sticky, that prices don't fall in the same way that prices rise. People are reluctant to take a loss. We talk this week about what that means in terms of the real estate market and why it is sometimes we don't know when to fold them. This week on When the Facts Change. Well, kia ora and welcome to When the Facts Change to Sarah Wood, the CEO of realestate.co.nz. Welcome in to When the Facts Change, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
I'm curious about April in the housing market. You've got some fresh data hot off the servers. Tell us about April in the housing market.
Yeah, look, April's been interesting. I mean, we're sort of saying it's been a relatively stable market, but I think there's some interesting things that have happened. The total housing stock for April is sitting at 35,000, so it's still a very, very high number of homes for sale, and it's actually up 6% on what the prior year was. But what was also interesting was that the total number of new properties that were coming to market, which was 8,500, was actually down versus the same time last year and down by 11%. Now, we have seen just a lot of new properties coming month after month. It's been the conversation we've been having for the last 2 years. So this is actually a bit of a change for us to see those total number of homes that are new home listings dropping. So that's been quite a change. The national average asking price has stayed sort of around that 850,000 mark at the same time.
Why do you think there's been that drop in the number of new listings coming on?
Yeah, it's quite hard to tell. I think, we have had for the last few years, we've just had a really consistent high flow of listings through. I think that, there's quite a bit of uncertainty just generally. There's sort of questions around what's happening with the OCR, and I don't know whether that has made people reconsider whether they bring their property to market now versus a little bit later. So it's hard to tell, but it is actually interesting to see that change because that is not the conversation we've been having.
Yeah, because over the last year or so, there's been a lot of hope and expectation, particularly once the interest rate started being cut, a couple of 100 basis points, and the uncertainty around the election was removed. But it's never really perhaps taken off or rebounded in the way that some might have expected. And the number of properties being sold has increased from a year ago, but it hasn't really, bounced back to the sort of 2021 type levels that we saw. What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, 2021 was off the back of COVID, right? We had just record low interest rates, and we had quite a different sort of economic situation in terms of interest and what was happening. So that was like a frenzied market where we were not getting enough homes coming to market to actually sell, and we had this massive FOMO issue. So look at that compared to where we are now. It's very stable and very consistent. There are properties selling, there are people looking, things are turning over, but it doesn't have the same sort of frenzy that you would have had in 2021. But I've got to say that's an easier market to transact in. And, most people that are bringing their properties to market are also looking to buy, So you have first home buyers and you have investors, but you have a large portion of the market that, are subsequent home buyers. So there's a lot to be said for that kind of level of stability.
Particularly around how homes are selling, auctions versus other types of sales. What have you seen in the last couple of years and the trends there?
Yeah, so going back to that peak of the 2021 market that you referred to, auctions were taking up 35% of all homes that were coming to market to be sold. Now look at February this year, that number was 25, and it drops off as you kind of come out of that summer period. So it was just under 20% in the month of April, and so now we're seeing a few more sort of price types that where you're putting price on a property, and that's really about also engaging interest from buyers.
Yeah, I'm curious about the psychology of how people sell their house and buyers. You talked about fear of missing out, FOMO, as a factor, but there's also a sort of a FOMO for sellers as well, particularly in this market where we've seen prices drop anywhere between 10 to 20% from their highs at the end of 2021. And it's now, 2 or 3 years on from that. And that's an unusual thing for a lot of people in this market to see prices stay below their previous peaks for several years, and not just by 1 or 2%, by in some places a more significant amount. What do you think's the psychology for sellers here who may not necessarily being, they're not being forced to sell, obviously with the exception of relationship breakups or estate sales. Most people are, in fact, almost all people are not under pressure from a bank. The number of mortgagee sales is still remarkably low compared to, let's say, 2008, 9, 10. So what's the psychology of the sellers here when they're having to, if they are going to transact, they're having to accept a price which may be below a valuation that they saw on their government valuation or council valuation bit of paper, or maybe they saw on some website somewhere. So how are they thinking about that compared to previous years when normally you're selling for more than what you bought it for and for more than what CV might be?
Yeah, and I think that's a really tricky thing for sellers to get their head around. And I do think there's a lot of data, and we have it on our site under Market Insights, where we actually show that trend information between what the sold price was in that suburb versus what the asking price is. And, you can see those gaps. And for a long time, we would see the asking price would sit, 2 to 3% above the sold price. And then over the last, you go back to 2021, and all of those rules have been all over the show in terms of what the data shows. So it is interesting. The reality is if people don't need to sell, they might bring their property to market, but if they don't get the price they're looking for, they might take it off. There would be a whole range of different reasons, but we are still getting a lot of properties to market. I mean, 35,000 homes for sale is incredible.
Could you put that into the context of the various years of listings for sale? How much supply have we got?
So when we were at our lowest point of stock, which was sort of, I can't quote the exact year, but it was in that post-COVID time where there was just not enough stock coming to market. I think our numbers got as low as like 12,500, so which was the lowest we've ever had. And so this kind of puts us back to levels where we were sort of sitting around, 7 or 8 years ago. Like it's quite a different number. But it's actually a really good thing for New Zealanders because it gives them options. But yeah, in terms of the psyche of sellers, it depends on where they're at. If you were looking to buy another home, then, it's not such a, you go, okay, well, maybe I'm not getting what I expect, or I've been used to getting these on paper kind of valuation increases. But if you're buying and selling in the same market, then that becomes less relevant, because if the prices have come down in your suburb, then they've probably come down for all property type, within reason. That effect will be across more than just the property that they're selling.
Yeah, there's an interesting psychology issue here, which behavioural economists have identified, which is that people are much more intense about crystallising a loss. They really, really, really don't like it compared to when they make a gain, and it's interesting. There's a stickiness issue. So prices aren't sticky on the way up, but they get quite sticky on the way down. And I wonder if you can see that in the data around particularly the number of people who leave their properties listed for quite some time, perhaps longer than they would have in the past, and then some who in the end decide to take it off.
Look, we see a bit of a range of things, but at the moment, what we're seeing is actually the total number of homes are just, when you look at that total number, it doesn't feel like there's lots of people bringing their properties off the market. Do
you think as we get closer to winter, there may be some people who think, the sun's not shining, the open homes, there's a bit, the path's a bit wet, maybe it'll be a bit more difficult.
There's a lot to be said for, really driving and having that campaign around selling a property. So you try and drive the maximum amount of interest. You create some competitive tension. So there's a lot to be said for that. So it will be interesting to see what happens with the numbers over that winter period. If you've had your property on the market for 4-6 months and it's not selling, do you reevaluate it? Again, it depends what people's needs are, right? If you need to sell, or you're under financial pressure, or you need to downsize, sometimes there's only so long that people can hold off for, and you see that in the way that people will sell, whether they'll meet the market or not. Yeah,
I'm curious about that capitulation moment, I suppose you could call it. When people have gone, I can hang on for a year or two. I was planning to retire, I was planning to downsize, or I was planning to upsize, and you hang in there. There's too many kids in a bedroom, or there's several bedrooms that are empty, or you really feel like you want to go to the retirement home. But I'm curious about that aging. The best before sticker on people's sales decision.
Yeah, look, it is a really interesting thing, and I think it's it depends on where you are in the home buying cycle. As to what that pressure looks like, and at what point do you go, actually, do you know what, I'm going to meet the market, because otherwise I can't move my life on. I've seen it with different people that we know that have been selling properties, and there just is a point where they go, actually, I just need to make that change, or make that adjustment in my expectations to move on.
There's a lot of volatility and uncertainty out there, particularly offshore. But you know what? There's some good news. The New Zealand economy is recovering from a deep and painful recession. This year is predicted to be better than last, and 2026 looks even brighter. Lower interest rates are fueling a recovery, easing the cost of living and creating opportunities for businesses. Learn more about New Zealand's positive economic outlook at kiwibank.co.nz.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're going to love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Yeah, and what are you seeing from estate agents who have put their listings through realestate.co.nz in terms of, how they are, for the want of a better word, managing their clients? How are they trying to shift those expectations? Because, of course, agents really make their money when there's a sale. A listing that gets taken off is not a lot of fun.
Yeah, I do think this is where data plays a really interesting role. Like, you think about what data was available even 5 years ago, and it just wasn't that publicly available. So there's a lot, the agents using data, they're looking at recent sales, they're looking at time on site, all of those things to try and get their vendors to sort of understand where the market's sitting, if there's a gap in their expectation versus where they think the buyers are at. And, that's where I think the data plays a really big role in sort of answering that.
And I'm guessing it also provides some power for the sellers and the buyers, because often a lot of this data is available to them as well in a way that perhaps it wasn't, 5 or 10 years ago.
No, it really wasn't available 5 or 10 years ago. Yeah. And, we say the same thing to real estate agents as well as to vendors. Understand the numbers. Like, there is actually a lot of data. Like, we have all sold information on our site with all the market insights. You can go on to RINES, which is the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand. You can actually see, the same data from a different perspective of data. But, again, another really great data set where you can sort of see trend information over time. So there's a lot out there. It's really about people being prepared to do that research and really understand and track the market that they're in. But again, it depends on how motivated they are for that sale or that change.
We don't have the numbers yet for actual sales as opposed to listings for April yet. They'll come through in a few weeks. But what are you seeing broadly in terms of asking prices versus sales prices? Is that something that you can keep an eye on?
Yeah, so what we've seen, the average asking price has been sitting around between 850,000 and 890,000. So this month for April, it's sitting at 850,000. I think what's interesting when you look at the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand data of what properties were sold in March, so it's March, not April, they had sold more properties in March than they did the year prior. So it does show that properties are now starting to move and sell through. So, their number of sales were up 12.8% nationally. And if you take Auckland out, they're up 14%. So a lot more movement through those regions as well, given the size of Auckland in that data set.
And what sort of indicators of heat are you seeing, across the country? Are there any areas where there's a bit more action, where asking prices are closer to sales prices, or, where the volumes going through both of listings and sales are hotter or cooler?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of interesting things. Otago, Central Lakes, it's just always a standout region, right? So total, they've got a lot of homes for sale compared to where they were last year, so they're up 28%. But, Otago is up for both average asking price and for year on year and month on month, and Otago Central Lakes is down year on year, but actually again up month on month. So there's some interesting things there. Interesting to see Bay of Plenty. So Bay of Plenty average asking price is up year on year 7%, month on month 6%, 6.4%. I think they're going to be quite an interesting region to watch. Just anecdotally, I'm hearing a lot more activity in terms of going to multi-offers and having a lot of offers at the table. So it's interesting to see some of those sort of regional markets starting to move. What was interesting in the data this month as well was that actually, we're going back to that conversation around new listings being back 11%. Auckland was actually back in new listings versus where it was last year. So for April, it was down 21%. So it'll be interesting to see in the months going forward, what does that mean? And I do think, you would talk about the market being pretty stable. There's a lot of options. While people have got a lot of options, they've got room to negotiate. And as you start to see, if new listings continue to be shorter than what they were last year, then and total stock starts to sell through, then you can see the dynamics of the market change.
Yeah, and an interesting geographic quirk, which is that active, hotter region, in real estate terms at least, of the Central Otago, Queenstown Lakes area, is right next to what could be deemed the coldest region. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so yes, Central Otago Lakes being the most expensive region in the country, average asking price is usually sitting around that 1.6 million mark. It borders West Coast, which is the cheapest region in the country, at just over 500,000. So quite different in terms
If only you could commute.
If only you
that
could
easy.
commute. I know, the opportunity for West Coast, if we could just make that a bit easier.
So just looking ahead, which can be a dangerous thing, but it's worth sort of keeping our heads looking over the horizon. What are the things that you think might move the market in the next 6 months or so? The things that buyers and sellers are looking for. They might be decision points, triggers, things that will bring people in or not?
I mean, I think the OCR changes are going to be the most crucial, right? Like how far and how quickly are they going to come down? I think at the moment there's still a lot of chat around it, but creates a lot of uncertainty. So, do you move now? Is that number going to come down a lot further? So I think OCR is going to be one of the key things. I think that, we've also got other challenges in New Zealand, like higher unemployment rates. When you looked at the data on people leaving New Zealand, like in December last year, they were, record sort of numbers leaving New Zealand. So how does that affect, what people are, number of people that are buying? Yes, we've got people immigrating into New Zealand, but, what is the balance of how that's going to shape out? But there's a lot of there's a lot of commentary around what's happening on the global economy and whether that's just making people go, you know what, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait another 4 weeks. I'm just going to wait another 8 weeks to see how that rolls out. But I do think OCR will be really critical, and I also think over time we'll see what happens over the next sort of 4 to 6 months in terms of total number of stock, total number of homes for sale, like how quickly they're going to sell through. To see what kind of spring we'll have in terms of options, because the sort of laws of supply and demand will also come into effect depending on what those numbers look like, or what those opportunities for buyers look like.
I'm curious too about the role of the sales of brand new homes, which is a relatively rare thing in our market. Typically, houses that are being built on spec, and the section may have been bought some time ago, but the actual empty brand new property really sort of turns up on the market. But we have seen that change quite a bit in the last year or so, with a lot of townhouses coming on. Can you talk to us a bit about, where they are and what's going on there?
So what I'd say is, we have seen building consents basically kind of drop back over the last couple of years, and that has affected the number of new homes coming to market, because we had such a, we had this, that, look at the average asking price where we were, a couple of years ago, we had those drops back, and that affected, developers going, actually, am I going to do this small development, let alone the larger developments? But we are seeing it's almost like a slight change in terms of attached townhouses being something that is being built. So we're just working through obviously getting those sold, but certainly the style of development or how we move into that sort of higher density housing is part of it. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes. But yes, there are new homes for sale, and they'll sell through at a similar rate. I think that they have done.
Because at some point there must be, the developers or whoever owns the home, if it's empty, must be starting to think there's a best before date on the sale.
Yeah, but again, it's that whole thing about meeting the market, right? Like if you need to move the property, and again, I've got anecdotal examples of people saying, actually, I've got a great price on this townhouse. The developers made money, but not as much money as they had previously planned to. But they've moved the properties on, and they move on to the next development. So it's all part of the cycle.
Sarah Wood from realestate.co.nz, thank you so much for being on When the Facts Change.
Thank you.
When the Facts Change was brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, together with KiwiBank. Visit kiwibank.co.nz to find out how KiwiBank are making Kiwi better off.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.